Greetings, greetings. What a fascinating topic we have for today. The food of blessing and the food of cursing. This and nothing less is our subject. But stop for a moment before you take your next bite. Look at it. Now answer this question silently, but with absolute honesty. What if that food shouldn't be blessed? For centuries, we have repeated blessings almost mechanically. We say blessed be, without even asking ourselves what we are actually blessing. But the Mishnah, in Berakhot 6.3, makes an uncomfortable, dangerous, almost heretical statement for many. There are foods so marked by a curse that no blessing should be pronounced over them. Rabbi Yehuda says it bluntly. There is food that does not deserve to be elevated to the sacred plane, because it is born from brokenness, from harm, from plague, from the corruption of the earth. And now comes the truly controversial part. The famous and controversial Apostle Paul, or Saul of Tarsus, in some of his epistles, affirms the exact opposite, that no food is impure in itself, that all food created by God is good, but at the same time, he declares that there are tables of demons, that there are foods that, depending on the context in which they are eaten, cease to be food and become spiritual participation with dark forces. So who is right? Is it Rabbi Yehuda, who places the curse on the object, or Paul, who places it on the context? Is it possible that both are revealing parts of the same deeper truth? In this class, you will enter a territory that almost no one dares to explore rigorously. Food, curse, idolatry, consciousness, demons, blessing, all on the same axis. Not from superstition, but from the sources. Mishnah, Talmud, Shar HaMitzvot, Shulchan Aruch, Arizal, and the authentic letters of Paul read without ecclesiastical filters, but in their historical context. By the way, behind me is a recreation of a public market in the 1st century in cities like Thessaloniki, or Colossae, to whom the letter to the Colossians was written, in present-day Turkey. And although you can't see the number of flies or smell the bad odors that were in those places, this photograph, created of course by artificial intelligence, shows us a little of what those markets were like in the Gentile world of the 1st century, where the Pauline epistles were written, and also, during those same years, these Mishnayot were being taught in the tractate Berakhot that we are studying in this free course. After this class, you will never eat the same way again, neither spiritually nor intellectually. Because the real question is not what you eat. The real question is, what forces are you activating every time you eat? If you are ready for that, then stay. What comes next is not information, it is confrontation.
This is Abel Flores, a humble servant who is very happy that you are sharing your time studying on Mishna TV. Make yourself comfortable.
The Mishnah we are studying today is Berakhot chapter 6, teaching 3, and it says, "And concerning food that does not grow from the earth, one recites, by whose word all things came into being. And concerning vinegar, that is, wine that has fermented and spoiled, and concerning novelot, dates that have spoiled, and concerning locusts, one recites, by whose word all things came into being. Likewise, concerning milk, cheese, and eggs, one recites, by whose word all things came into being." Rabbi Yehuda says, concerning any food that is the result of a curse, no blessing is recited over it. None of the items listed exist under normal conditions, for they arise as a result of a curse. Now, allow me to invite you to close your eyes for a moment. Yes, even while you listen to me, and think about something so commonplace, so seemingly trivial, as a simple blessing before eating. That little gesture we make almost without realizing it. And now, suddenly, the Mishnah in Berakhot 6.3 tells us, wait a minute, even in the trivial, there is a universe of questions. That's where our story begins. Because this Mishnah doesn't talk about grand ceremonies or holidays. It talks about vinegar, spoiled dates, locusts, the kind permitted by the Torah in the time of Moses, but which no longer exist, cheese, eggs, and yes, even mushrooms. It's almost as if the sages had entered your kitchen, checked your refrigerator, and said, well, let's see what blessing corresponds to this culinary disaster. And behind the humor is a profound question. What blessing is appropriate when what you have before you doesn't grow from the earth, or when the food seems to be the result of a kelalá, a curse? The Mishnah organizes everything elegantly. That which does not come directly from the earth, that whose origin is not vegetable, meat, poultry, fish, milk, eggs, receives the general formula, Shehakol nihye bidvaró, that simple yet radical phrase, by whose word everything came into existence. It's the wild card, the master key, the acknowledgement that even when the origin isn't so clear, existence remains a miracle sustained by a divine word. And then comes the second blow. Spoiled food, vinegar, unripe fruit, dates ruined by the sun or blown to the ground by the wind. Here, the Mishnah becomes almost poetic. Even what seems like decay still deserves spiritual recognition. But not a specific recognition, not a borei periaetz, which would honor the fullness of the fruit, but the humble, universal Shehakol. Because the sages tell us, the detailed blessing was established for creation in its ideal state. When creation is flawed, we use the most basic, the most existential blessing. The Gemara in Berakhot 6.3, as always, enters with a magnifying glass, and the first thing it does is define with surgical precision what that which does not grow from the earth means. And here rabbinic wisdom becomes almost zoological. Domestic and wild animals, birds, fish, kosher locusts, all of that, even though many live on, touch, or walk on the earth, is not considered a product of the earth in the halakhic sense. That's why the blessing remains Shehakol. It's a subtle, almost philosophical distinction. It doesn't matter where it lives. It matters what it feeds on and how its essence is formed. Then the Gemara expands the catalog of spoiled items. Stale bread, wine that is beginning to turn, stews that have lost their original form, salt, brine, truffles, and mushrooms. Here a gem of a discussion arises. Do mushrooms really grow from the earth? The rabbinic answer is delightful. They grow on the earth, yes, but they don't nourish themselves from the earth like a plant. They are like those students who are always present, but we don't know where they get their energy from. So technically, they don't fall into the plant category. Again, Shehakol. End of course. Now the novelot appear, those peculiar dates. Some are boshlei kamra, sun-scorched. Others are tamrei dezika, those that fell because of the wind. And here the question is almost like a detective story. If they are just fallen dates, why not say borei periaetz? The Gemara responds by shifting conceptual pieces. Perhaps the category of min kelalá applies more to vinegar and other cases, not necessarily to all types of novelot. The Mishna, after all, is a compact network where every word carries weight. Then Rabbi Yehuda appears with a strong and, admittedly, controversial stance. Over anything that is min kelalá, one does not recite a blessing at all. In Aramaic, it sounds even more forceful. For him, when creation is affected by a kind of curse, the act of blessing becomes inappropriate. It's a serious theological view. How can one give thanks for something that seems to be the fruit of decay? But the normative tradition does not follow that opinion. And the reason is beautiful. Because even in deterioration, even in spoiled food, even in vinegar that was once wine, there is still a spark of life. There is still existence. There is still a minimum of inherent goodness. And even if we cannot recite the particular blessing that celebrates the integrity of the fruit, we can still say Shehakol. Creation continues to be sustained word by word. Perhaps this is the true spiritual message. Not everything in life deserves a detailed celebration, but everything deserves at least an acknowledgement. Sometimes our days are pure wine, other times they are vinegar. There are luminous moments and others that seem min kelalá, the fruit of wear and tear, excessive sun, or an untimely wind. However, even there, tradition invites us to say, Shehakol nihye bidvaró. Everything, absolutely everything, exists by that primordial word. And if even stale bread, an ambiguous mushroom, and a fallen date can receive a blessing, perhaps each of our days, even those we consider ruined, can also be seen anew as part of a larger process. So the next time you take something simple, a glass of water, a piece of cheese, an imperfect piece of fruit, remember that you are reciting more than just a formula. You are acknowledging that life still has meaning, even when it doesn't look its best. Because in the end, the blessing doesn't describe the state of the food. It describes the state of the soul that receives it. Now, imagine we open the Rambam, Maimonides, and the Shulchan Aruch, as if they were two lanterns illuminating, without ambiguity, what the Mishnah subtly hinted at. Rambam, in Hilkot Berakhot chapter 8, is crystal clear. Any food that does not grow from the earth, meat, fish, poultry, milk, cheese, eggs, receives the blessing of Shehakol. If the food is spoiled, but people still eat it, it also receives Shehakol. And Rambam remains silent on Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Even if something is a fruit of a curse, if you consume it as food, you recite the blessing. The Shulchan Aruch Ora Chaim 204 takes this basis and organizes it with rabbinic precision. It lists meats, fish, kosher locusts, dairy products, water, salt, honey, mushrooms, and truffles, Shehakol. And it adds nuances. Water drunk to quench thirst receives Shehakol, drinkable vinegar too. But if it is so strong that no one drinks it, no blessing is recited. The same applies to foods that, when cooked, lose their form to the point of abandoning their original category. They descend to Shehakol. What emerges from all this? A simple and profound criterion. The blessing follows the current state of the food. If it is normal food, even if ugly, bruised, or imperfect, we recite the blessing. If it has lost its condition as food, like harmful vinegar, no blessing is recited. Even products born under extreme conditions, the so-called min kelalá, fall under Shehakol if they are still edible. Halakha does not follow the severity of Rabbi Yehuda. It follows real life. The underlying idea is beautiful. We bless where there is human benefit. The world does not always give us perfect fruit. Sometimes it gives us what the sun burned or time deformed. But as long as that food nourishes us, it deserves recognition. Because the blessing does not celebrate perfection. It celebrates existence sustained by the divine word. In contemporary practice, the principle is the same. Animal products, processed foods, moderately acidic drinks, ugly but edible fruits, all of that is Shehakol. Only when something ceases to be food does the blessing disappear. Ultimately, Berakhot 6.3 teaches us that even the imperfect can be blessed, because we continue to live, eat, and give thanks in a world that is not ideal, but is nonetheless sacred. Now, what exactly did Rabbi Yehuda mean by food produced from a curse? It's not a metaphor. For the commentators, it's a very specific category. Maimonides, in his commentary on the Mishna, defines novlat as fruits that fell before ripening, dates blown down by the wind or scorched by the sun. Min kelalá, he says, are precisely those prematurely ruined fruits, and also locusts, because both situations reflect damage to the crops. And he concludes clearly, the Halakha is not according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda of Bartanura follows the same path. Novlat are fallen fruits, govai are kosher locusts, and both are called min kelalá because they come from agricultural misfortunes, plagues, droughts, winds. Tosafot Yom Tov presents two interpretations of Rabbi Yehuda. A milder one, Rabbi Yehuda was only talking about vinegar and novlat, which were good at first, but then spoiled. The other, stricter one, even locusts would be min kelalá, not because of their taste, which can be good, but because the locust, as a plague, destroys fields. For many commentators, then, curse is not a moral judgment, but an agricultural diagnosis, something that harms the blessing of the land. The Gemara, in its surgical style, asks what kind of novlot they are exactly. Dates scorched by the sun? Fruits blown down by the wind? Depending on how they are defined, the label of curse changes. But the interesting thing is that after all this conceptual dissection, Maimonides, Bartanura, and most of the Rishonim conclude the same thing. In the end, we do not follow Rabbi Yehuda. If the food is still edible, the blessing is Shehakol nihye bidvaró. When we get to the Shulchan Aruch, Originates 204, the discussion becomes purely practical. Meat, fish, poultry, mushrooms, dairy products, kosher locusts, Shehakol. Deteriorated but edible foods, such as moldy bread or wine that is beginning to sour, these also require the Shehakol blessing. But when the deterioration is extreme, and they are no longer suitable for normal consumption, for example, vinegar so strong that it is harmful, then no blessing is recited. This is the closest, in halachic practice, to Rabbi Yehuda's intuition, not because the food is cursed, but because it is no longer considered food. And here a fascinating point emerges. The concept of min, species. Rabbi Yehuda, according to studies such as those by Har Etzion, always operates with this category: species of herbs, species of the seven fruits, species of curse. For him, the decisive factor is not the physical state of the food, but to which metaphysical family it belongs. If it belongs to the curse type, it is outside the liturgical circuit. For the sages, on the other hand, the focus is not the ideal species, but the concrete reality of the food before you. In the background is the Bible. Genesis 3, where the earth is cursed. Deuteronomy 28, where plagues, droughts, and locusts appear. For Rabbi Yehuda, eating something that directly embodies that rupture is to symbolically consume oneself in the curse itself. To bless it would be, in his logic, to spiritually legitimize the tragedy. It is not enough that it is edible. What matters is what cosmic story that fallen fruit or ruined wine is telling. The sages respond with a more inclusive vision. They recognize that reality is sometimes damaged, that fruit falls, that wine turns to vinegar, that locusts invade. But as long as the human being receives a real benefit, even a small one, it is appropriate to bless. We do not bless the curse, we bless the spark of life that remains there, fighting within the imperfect. Shehakol thus becomes an act of faith in a broken world, a recognition that the divine word sustains even what is no longer ideal. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson. Even in the product of a curse, there is a minimal light that deserves to be recognized. Because the blessing is not reserved for what is perfect, but for what still nourishes, still sustains, still reflects, even if faintly, the pulse of creation. At this point, we've reached the halfway mark of this class, so we're taking a short break to let you know that if you're willing to make a donation, you can do so by scanning the QR code you see on the screen or by clicking the link below in the description of this video. Personally, I, Abel Flores, greatly appreciate your contribution because it helps us a lot in continuing to produce all this content, which is free for everyone, and thus giving more people the opportunity to learn about these ancient teachings. You can also help us a lot by subscribing to this channel, La Mishna TV, giving us a like, and sharing this video on your social media and messaging apps. Thank you very much. Also, you should know that on our website, lamishna.com, you will find all these classes, supporting materials, texts, articles, reports, and supplementary information for our free course on the Mishna. Now, don't go anywhere, because we're continuing with our class. When we speak of food produced by a curse, we must first be very honest. There is no direct commentary on Rabbi Yehuda's statement in the classic Kabbalistic texts. What we can do, however, is compare his idea with the general Kabbalistic view on food, sparks of holiness, and klipot, shells of impurity. Kabbalah, from the time of the Arizal and later Hasidism, teaches that in every food there are nitzotzot, sparks of holiness. By eating something permissible, with a blessing, and with proper intention, kavanah, a person elevates these sparks. If one eats crudely or without a blessing, the sparks remain trapped, and the person sinks a little deeper into the realm of the klipot, those shells of concealment and judgment. So what would food produced by a curse be in this language? Something that arises from an aggressive disruption in the blessing of the land, plagues of locusts that devastate fields, fruits that fall before ripening, wine that spoils, processes that even damage health. These are realities where the dinim, rigors, and the klipot dominate the scene. In this light, Rabbi Yehuda would be saying, there are situations in which the proportion of curse is so high that it is not appropriate to activate the spiritual mechanism of the blessing. There is almost nothing left to elevate. But Jewish law, Halakha, does not follow this position. The practical rule is, if the food is kosher and still edible, a blessing is recited, usually Shehakol, when it has lost its original form. Only when it is so damaged that it is no longer considered food is the blessing omitted. Hasidism takes this a step further. The mission of the Jew is to transform even these gray areas. As long as Jewish law permits eating it, the blessing does not legitimize the curse, but rather rescues the sparks of good that still reside within it. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda sees certain foods as almost pure curse. The later tradition responds, if it still provides nourishment, your task is to bless and elevate. Now, we are going to delve into a study of another Tannaite rabbi, that is from the time of the Mishna, of the second or third generation, as was Saul of Tarsus, although better known as the Apostle Paul. Because this character, who claimed to have been educated in the school of Gamaliel, wrote extensively about food and idols. Paul takes up the most delicate issue of the ancient Mediterranean, meat sacrificed to idols, even in cities where there were Jewish communities. This happened especially if they were metropolises, and breaks it down into 4 different scenarios, each with its own moral and spiritual nuance. In 1 Corinthians 8, 1-13, he himself states the issue, concerning things sacrificed to idols, idolothuta, and he declares unequivocally, an idol is nothing in the world, and there is no God but one. The meat, then, is not ontologically contaminated. The real danger lies in the conscience of the weak brother, who may return to idolatry, and in the arrogance of the strong, who uses his freedom without love. His thesis is almost surgical. The meat is neutral. Sin appears when your freedom destroys the other. In 1 Corinthians 10:14-22, Paul raises the tone. Eating at the banquets of the idolatrous temple is to participate, he says, at the table of demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. Here it is no longer a matter of conscience, but of actual worship. In that context, eating sacrificed meat becomes demonized. The act itself links you with idolatry. Then, in 1 Corinthians 10:25-30, he returns to everyday life. In the market, eat whatever is sold, without asking any questions for conscience's sake. In the house of a non-believer, the same. Eat without investigating. Only if someone tells you this was offered to idols, abstain, not because of the food, but for the sake of the other person's conscience. Outside the temple, the meat becomes neutral again. Self-denial is a testimony to and an act of caring for one's neighbor. In Romans 14, Paul addresses another case. Some only eat vegetables out of scruples. Nothing is unclean in itself, but to him who considers anything to be unclean, to him it is unclean. And he pleads, do not destroy the work of God for the sake of food. It is wrong to eat meat if it causes your brother to stumble. Ontologically, everything is clean. Ethically, what matters is conscience and fellowship. In 1 Timothy 4:3-5, he denounces those who forbid marriage and command abstinence from foods that God created. And he establishes a universal principle. Everything God created is good. Nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for it is sanctified by the word of God and prayer. The curse is not in the food, but in the doctrines that demonize it. Finally, Colossians 2:16-23 combats the asceticism that absolutizes food rules. Let no one judge you in matters of food or drink. And he criticizes human commandments. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which have an appearance of wisdom, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. Paul's entire argument is consistent. Foods are ontologically good. The moral problem arises when food becomes an idol, a stumbling block, or a false criterion of spirituality. Rabbi Yehuda, the same one from the Mishnah we studied today in Berakhot 6.3, maintains that certain foods are min kelalá, a product of curse, ruined fruits, spoiled wine, pests such as locusts. He concludes that over such things no Berakhah is recited. The final Halakha, however, does not follow him. As long as the food is edible, a blessing is recited, normally Shehakol. When we look at Paul, the agreement is not with Rabbi Yehuda, but with the sages. For him, no food created by God is cursed in itself. Meat sacrificed to idols is ontologically neutral. 1 Corinthians 8:4, Romans 14:14, 1 Timothy 4:4. What corrupts the act is not the matter itself, but participating in an idolatrous ritual or violating a brother's conscience. But there is a partial parallel with Rabbi Yehuda's intuition. He said that certain foods loaded with curse fall outside of blessing. Paul states that, in the temple, he is obviously speaking of pagan temples, sacrificial meat becomes the table of demons, 1 Corinthians 10:20-21. There it is no longer simple food.
It is a contaminated cultural sign. And in that context, the proper response is not to bless, but to abstain completely. In both cases, Paul's, who sides with the Hakamim, and Rabbi Yehuda's, who is stricter in this Mishnah or tradition, when reality is so marked by curse or idolatry, the response is not to elevate it, but to separate from it. The crucial difference lies in where the curse is located. For Rabbi Yehuda, the curse is in the object itself, fallen fruits, spoiled wine, pests. These foods are min kelalá and never enter the universe of blessing, even if they are technically edible. Paul, by contrast, shifts the curse from the object to the context. The same meat can be the table of demons if eaten in an idolatrous temple, or fully legitimate if purchased in the market without asking questions. Remember that these were times of famine and poverty. There were no supermarkets as there are today, nor such access to food, much less processed food. None of that existed in that era. Eating well was almost a miracle in the first century, and even more so after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem and the Roman wars against the Jews. That is why he can state at the same time that every food created by God is good, and that certain contexts are spiritually lethal. The underlying problem is the same. Can one bless and eat without further thought what comes from a broken, idolatrous world marked by curse? Rabbi Yehuda, within Jewish Halakha,
looks at reality from the responsibility of the people of Israel toward the promised land. For him, certain products, ruined fruits, pests such as locusts, spoiled wine, are min kelalá, that is, a direct expression of the curse upon the land. His position is that the mark of curse is so strong that such food does not even enter the universe of blessing. It is a stricter opinion than that of the sages, who do allow a blessing of Shehakol as long as it remains edible. Paul operates in a different field, Gentile communities in pagan cities, with no obligation to the specific halachot of Israel. He says, nothing is unclean in itself. Everything created by God is good if it is received with thanksgiving. Matter is not cursed. So where is the problem? In the idolatrous context, eating at the temple banquet is the table of demons. Buying the same meat in the marketplace outside the rite is legitimate. Paul is less strict regarding the object, because his battle is not against the meat itself, but against idolatry and the destruction of conscience, which is the main problem in the Gentile world, where there is no Torah, no tradition, no patriarchs. In summary, Rabbi Yehuda places the emphasis on the object, food as a product of curse. Paul places the emphasis on the context and use, the idolatrous table, or causing a brother to stumble. But both are asking exactly the same question. Can everything we eat be brought into blessing, or are there things and situations that lie outside it? The honest conclusion is this: there is no food that is cursed in itself forever. What exists is food marked by curse, according to Rabbi Yehuda, and do not forget that this opinion is not the majority view among the sages, and food used as an instrument of idolatry or stumbling, according to Paul. The discussion, then, is not whether one should eat or refrain from eating, but rather, what spiritual reality am I legitimizing when I eat and when I bless? For the Jew, the final Halakha follows the sages. As long as it is kosher and edible, it is blessed and elevated. For the believing Gentile, Paul teaches, as long as you do not join in idolatry or destroy a brother's conscience, the food is good and may be received with gratitude. The emphasis for the Gentile is on idolatry because it is one of the commandments of the 7 laws of Noah. Paul is essentially legislating for Gentiles, and Rabbi Yehuda is doing so for Jews. What is truly uncomfortable is this: neither Rabbi Yehuda nor Paul allow you to go on eating automatically. Every bite forces a spiritual question. Am I using this food as a bridge toward blessing, or as an excuse to keep living alongside the curses of this world? The answer to that question is not in the kitchen. It is in your conscience before God. This concludes today's lesson. Until the next video,